A wealthy white woman sobs dramatically in court, swaying the jury's sympathy. But everything flips when a black teen stands up, revealing secret emails she thought were hidden forever. What's in those emails? Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment on where you're watching from. Let's get started. Justice wears many faces in the Westfield County Courthouse. Some say it's blind, others claim it favors the wealthy. But today, as 17-year-old Marcus Johnson adjusted his borrowed tie in the courthouse bathroom mirror, he knew justice would need his help to see clearly. The reflection staring back showed a young black man with determined eyes that had seen too much for someone his age. "You ready for this?" asked Michael Chen, the public interest attorney who had taken Marcus's case pro bono after every other lawyer in town had mysteriously declined. Marcus nodded, his fingers gripping the flash drive in his pocket like a talisman. "Been ready for 3 years, sir." The hallway outside courtroom 3 was a study in contrast. On one side stood Marcus, his mother Tanisha, and attorney Chen, their suits clean but worn at the edges. On the other, a team of lawyers in bespoke suits surrounded Victoria Hargrove, the 45-year-old CEO of Westfield Properties and chairwoman of the city's education board. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her designer outfit impeccable, her expression one of practiced concern as photographers captured her entrance. Victoria's eyes briefly met Marcus's across the hall. She flinched almost imperceptibly before her lawyer whispered something, and her face reset to cool indifference. "Remember," Chen murmured to Marcus as the bailiff called the court to order, "no matter what they say, what they claim about you, we have the emails." Judge Eleanor Michaels entered, her reputation for fairness preceding her. At 68, she had seen every tactic the wealthy could employ to bend justice their way. Today's case, Johnson versus Westfield School District, with Victoria Hargrove named as a key defendant. This lawsuit alleges systemic discrimination in the allocation of educational resources, Chen began during his opening statement. Our client, Marcus Johnson, was labeled a troublemaker and pushed out of Westfield Academy despite his exemplary academic record. We intend to prove that Mrs. Hargrove, using her dual position as CEO of Westfield Properties and chairwoman of the Education Board, orchestrated a pattern of discrimination that affected dozens of minority students. Victoria's lead attorney, James Preston, rose with the confidence of someone who hadn't lost a case in 15 years. "Your Honor, these allegations are absurd. Mrs. Hargrove has dedicated her life to educational excellence in this community. The plaintiff was expelled for legitimate disciplinary reasons, documented extensively in his school record. This lawsuit is nothing but an attempt to extract money from a successful businesswoman and tarnish her reputation." As Preston spoke, Victoria maintained her composed demeanor, occasionally nodding in agreement or looking appropriately concerned. To everyone in the courtroom, she appeared the picture of an upstanding community leader wrongfully accused. Marcus watched her performance with quiet intensity. He knew what lurked beneath that carefully constructed facade. He'd spent 3 years collecting the evidence, piece by piece, email by email. The morning progressed through procedural motions and preliminary statements. Victoria's team submitted Marcus's school records, highlighting 3 incidents that led to his expulsion: disrupting class, threatening a teacher, and cheating on an exam. Documents signed by school officials, counselors, and Victoria herself painted a picture of a troubled student who had received every possible accommodation before the school was forced to remove him. "Mrs. Hargrove," Preston addressed his client once she took the stand, "could you explain your involvement in the plaintiff's case?" Victoria straightened, her voice steady. "As chairwoman of the Education Board, I review all expulsion cases. Marcus Johnson's situation was particularly troubling to me. We tried everything: counseling, mentorship programs, academic support. But when a student repeatedly violates our code of conduct and creates an unsafe environment, We have a responsibility to the other students. And did you have any personal bias against Mr. Johnson? Absolutely not, Victoria said, her expression softening with practiced sincerity. I founded the Westfield Scholarship Fund specifically to help underprivileged students. My life's work has been about creating educational opportunities, not denying them. From the gallery, Tanisha Johnson gripped her purse tightly, her knuckles whitening as she listened to this woman speak about her son as if he were a problem to be solved rather than a bright young man whose future had been deliberately derailed. When cross-examination began, Chen approached Victoria with methodical precision. Mrs. Hargrove, could you explain why Marcus's test scores placed him in the top 2% of students nationally, yet he was denied access to advanced placement courses? Test scores aren't everything, Mr. Chen. Classroom behavior and teacher recommendations are also considered. And who makes the final decision on advanced placement admissions? A committee, of which I am one member. Mrs. Hargrove, prior to Marcus's difficulties, did you know who he was? Victoria hesitated, just briefly enough for Marcus to notice. No, I don't personally know every student. You never had any interaction with his mother, Tanisha Johnson? Another pause. Not that I recall. Marcus leaned forward slightly. The first lie had been told under oath. Chen continued, Mrs. Hargrove, is it true that your company, Westfield Properties, purchased the Riverside Apartments 3 years ago? Victoria frowned. Yes, though I fail to see the relevance. And after acquiring the property, did you implement a significant rent increase? We improved those properties considerably. The rent adjustments reflected the market value and our investments. And when tenants couldn't afford these adjustments, what happened to them? Victoria's attorney objected, but Judge Michaels allowed the question, seeing its potential relevance. Some tenants chose to relocate, Victoria answered carefully, including Tanisha Johnson and her son Marcus, who had lived there for 12 years. Victoria's composure wavered slightly. I wouldn't know the specifics of individual tenants. Lie number 2, Marcus thought. Mrs. Hargrove, isn't it true that when Ms. Johnson organized the Riverside Tenants Association to negotiate with your company, you identified her as a troublemaker? Objection. Preston stood. This is a case about school discrimination, not housing policies. I'm establishing pattern and motive, Your Honor, Chen replied. Judge Michaels considered. I'll allow it, but tread carefully, Counselor. Victoria smoothed her skirt. I don't recall using that term. And when Marcus Johnson began excelling at Westfield Academy the following semester, earning attention from college recruiters and local press for his science project on urban water quality, a project that happened to highlight contamination issues in properties owned by your company. Did that concern you? Objection. Counsel is testifying, Preston interjected. Sustained, Judge Michaels ruled. Rephrase, Mr. Chen. Chen nodded. Mrs. Hargrove, did Marcus's science project on water quality testing concern you professionally? I encourage all students to pursue scientific inquiry, Victoria answered, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Though I would hope such projects would follow proper scientific methodology. Are you suggesting Marcus's project, which won the regional science fair and was validated by the State Environmental Protection Agency, was flawed? Victoria's calm facade cracked slightly. Those findings were preliminary and sensationalized by certain media outlets. Chen walked back to his table, retrieving a document. Your Honor, I'd like to enter into Evidence Exhibit C, a cease and desist letter sent by Mrs. Hargrove's attorneys to the Westfield Gazette regarding their coverage of Marcus's science project. As the document was presented, Victoria's eyes narrowed. She hadn't expected this angle of attack. My company has a right to defend itself against misleading information. The morning session continued with Victoria maintaining her composure through most questions, though Marcus noticed the subtle signs of strain, the tightening around her eyes, the occasional clenching of her jaw, the way her fingers pressed into the witness stand when Chen approached sensitive areas. Just before lunch recess, Chen changed tactics. "Mrs. Hargrove, do you use your personal email for school board business?" The question seemed innocuous, but Marcus saw Victoria stiffen. "Occasionally, though, we're encouraged to use our official accounts." "And do you ever discuss individual students in these emails?" Victoria shifted in her seat. "Only as necessary for official business, and always respecting privacy laws." Chen nodded, glancing at Marcus. "No further questions at this time, Your Honor. But we reserve the right to recall Mrs. Hargrove." As Judge Michaels called for lunch recess, Victoria's confident stride faltered slightly as she passed the plaintiff's table. Her eyes met Marcus's again, and this time he didn't look away. In that moment, Victoria Hargrove realized the poised young man before her was not the defenseless 14-year-old she had targeted 3 years ago. Something in his steady gaze told her he knew more than he should. Much more. And for the first time since the lawsuit was filed, Victoria Hargrove felt afraid. The courthouse cafeteria hummed with whispered conversations as Victoria Hargrove huddled with her legal team in a corner. Preston's normally confident demeanor had given way to urgent murmurs and furrowed brows. Victoria kept glancing toward Marcus, who sat with his mother and attorney Chen at a table across the room, picking at a sandwich. "How much do they know?" Preston asked, keeping his voice low. Victoria dabbed at her lips with a napkin. "There's nothing to know, James. We followed proper procedures with his expulsion." "Then why is Chen asking about your emails?" Another attorney, Rebecca Walsh, interjected. "We need to know what they have, Victoria." "I'm careful with what I put in writing," Victoria insisted, though a flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. Across the cafeteria, Chen was reviewing notes while Tanisha squeezed her son's hand. "You're doing great, baby," she whispered. "I'm so proud of you." Marcus nodded, his eyes never leaving Victoria's table. "She's getting nervous. Did you see her face when Mr. Chen mentioned the emails?" Chen glanced up. "Remember what we discussed. We don't show our full hand until the right moment. Let her worry about what we might have while we build the foundation with other witnesses." When court resumed, Preston called Dr. William Mercer, principal of Westfield Academy, to the stand. A tall man with graying temples and an air of academic authority, Mercer testified to the school's rigorous disciplinary standards and equal application of rules. "We evaluated Marcus Johnson's case thoroughly," Mercer stated. "The decision to expel was not made lightly or by any single individual." Chen's cross-examination was pointed. "Dr. Mercer, who first brought these disciplinary issues about Marcus to your attention?" Mercer cleared his throat. "I believe it was Mrs. Hargrove who initially expressed concerns." "Not his teachers? Not his counselor?" "Well, no, but..." "And in your 15 years as principal, how many times has the chairperson of the Education Board personally flagged a student's behavior for your review?" Mercer shifted uncomfortably. "It's uncommon." "Has it ever happened before Marcus?" "Not that I recall." Chen nodded. "You testified that Marcus threatened his chemistry teacher, Mr. Davis. Could you elaborate on that incident?" "According to Mr. Davis's report, Marcus became confrontational when questioned about his science project methodology, using aggressive language and posture. Was there any physical contact or specific threat?" "No, but Mr. Davis felt intimidated by the exchange." Chen retrieved a document. "Your Honor, I'd like to enter into Evidence Exhibit D, Marcus Johnson's actual statement from that day, as recorded by the school counselor." The document was presented to Mercer, who read it silently. "Dr. Mercer, would you please read Marcus's statement aloud for the court?" Mercer reluctantly complied. Mr. Davis told me my water testing methods were flawed and that I should choose another project. When I showed him the EPA guidelines I was following, he said I was being argumentative. I said I had a right to defend my work and asked why he was trying to discourage my research. He told me to watch my tone or I'd be proving certain stereotypes right. Does that sound like a threat to you, Dr. Mercer? Mercer looked uncomfortable. In context, with tone and body language. Just the words, Dr. Mercer. Do those words constitute a threat? No, Mercer admitted reluctantly. Chen continued methodically, dismantling each of the disciplinary incidents. The classroom disruption turned out to be Marcus questioning why the school curriculum omitted the contributions of black scientists. The cheating allegation stemmed from scoring too high on a standardized test, prompting an automatic review that found no evidence of misconduct, but left the suspicion lingering in his record. By mid-afternoon, Victoria's confident facade had noticeably cracked. She whispered urgently to Preston as Chen called his next witness, Jasmine Williams, a former administrative assistant to the Education Board. Jasmine, a woman in her early 30s, nervously adjusted her glasses as she took the stand. She had worked for the board for 5 years before leaving 6 months ago. Ms. Williams, Chen began, in your capacity as administrative assistant, did you have access to communication between board members? Yes, I managed correspondence and maintained records. And were you familiar with discussions regarding Marcus Johnson? Jasmine glanced at Victoria before answering. Yes, his name came up in several meetings and emails. Did these discussions seem typical for a student facing disciplinary action? No, Jasmine replied, her voice growing firmer. Mrs. Hargrove took a personal interest in his case that seemed unusual. Could you elaborate? She requested updates on his activities, his grades, his disciplinary record. She asked to be notified of any issues, however minor. Victoria's pen snapped in her hand, ink staining her fingers. Preston quickly handed her a handkerchief. Ms. Williams, did Mrs. Hargrove ever mention Marcus's mother or their previous interactions? Objection, Preston stood. Hearsay. Your Honor, Chen countered. Ms. Williams was present in her official capacity during these conversations. Judge Michaels considered. I'll allow it. The witness may answer. Jasmine straightened her shoulders. Yes, Mrs. Hargrove referred to Tanisha Johnson as that troublesome tenant from Riverside and mentioned that the son is following in his mother's footsteps. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Victoria's face flushed. Did Mrs. Hargrove ever explicitly connect Marcus's treatment at school with his mother's tenant organizing activities? She said, and I quote, "Some people need to learn there are consequences when they cause problems for the wrong people." Victoria leaned forward, whispering frantically to Preston, who stood to object. Your Honor, this is absurd. We're hearing selective recollections without context. Do you have documentation of these statements, Mr. Chen? Judge Michaels asked. Yes, Your Honor. Chen held up a flash drive, identical to the one Marcus had been holding earlier. Ms. Williams was concerned about what she witnessed and kept records. Preston's objection shifted instantly. Your Honor, any such records weren't included in discovery. We haven't had opportunity to review this alleged evidence. Mr. Chen? Judge Michaels raised an eyebrow. We only received this evidence yesterday when Ms. Williams came forward, Your Honor. We're prepared to submit it immediately and give defense time to review. Judge Michaels nodded. We'll take a 30-minute recess. Mr. Chen, provide copies to the defense and the court. As the courtroom emptied, Victoria cornered Preston in the conference room. What the hell just happened? You said this was an easy win. You told me there was nothing to find, Preston hissed. If you've been using your private email to... Don't you dare blame me, Victoria cut him off. You're paid to handle these situations. I can't handle what I don't know about. What's in those emails, Victoria? Before she could answer, Rebecca Walsh burst in, tablet in hand. "We have a problem. I've reviewed the first batch of emails Chen provided." Victoria sank into a chair. "How bad?" "There's an email chain between you and Dr. Mercer where you explicitly say, 'I want that Johnson boy gone. His mother is causing problems for my Riverside development, and his water quality project is attracting unwanted attention.'" Victoria's face went pale. "That's taken out of context." "There's more," Rebecca continued grimly. "Communications with the chemistry teacher suggesting he find fault with Marcus's project. Emails to the Advanced Placement Committee specifically flagging his application for extra scrutiny." Preston paced the room. "We need to discuss settlement options immediately." "No," Victoria stood abruptly. "I won't give that woman the satisfaction. Her son was a troublemaker who deserved what he got." "The emails say otherwise," Rebecca insisted. "This isn't about the boy anymore. This is about you using your position on the education board to pursue a personal vendetta." "They can't prove intent," Victoria argued. Preston slammed his hand on the table. "They don't need to prove intent beyond reasonable doubt. This is civil court. Preponderance of evidence is enough, and right now the evidence makes you look vindictive and corrupt." Victoria's composure finally shattered. "That woman and her protests cost me millions in delays on the Riverside development. Am I supposed to just smile and let her son continue causing problems too?" The room fell silent as the attorneys exchanged glances. They were no longer looking at their client with confidence, but with growing concern about being associated with her case. "I'll see what settlement terms they might accept," Preston said finally, heading for the door. "No settlements," Victoria insisted. "I'll deny everything. It's my word against some disgruntled ex-employee." Rebecca shook her head. "It's your words in your own emails, Victoria. Black and white. And from what I've seen, there are dozens more we haven't reviewed yet." As the recess ended and people filtered back into the courtroom, Marcus watched Victoria return to her seat. Her perfect composure had vanished. Her hair was slightly disheveled, her eyes darting nervously around the room. When her gaze met his, Marcus didn't see the powerful, untouchable woman who had destroyed his educational opportunities and forced his mother from their home of 12 years. He saw someone realizing that actions have consequences, even for the wealthy and connected. And as Judge Michaels called the court back to order, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 long years: the first taste of justice. Judge Michaels adjusted her glasses as court resumed, her expression betraying nothing of her thoughts on the evidence being presented. "Mr. Chen, you may continue with your witness." Victoria Hargrove stared straight ahead, her jaw clenched as Jasmine Williams returned to the stand. The former administrative assistant seemed to have found her courage during the recess, sitting taller as Chen approached. "Ms. Williams, we were discussing Mrs. Hargrove's unusual interest in Marcus Johnson's academic career. Did you observe any pattern to her interventions?" "Yes," Jasmine replied. "They intensified after Marcus won the regional science fair with his water quality project. Mrs. Hargrove was especially concerned about the media attention." "How do you know this?" "She explicitly stated in an email to board members that this situation could damage Westfield Properties' reputation and affect property values." Preston rose wearily. "Objection, Your Honor. The witness is selectively quoting from emails not yet admitted into evidence." "Mr. Chen?" Judge Michaels raised an eyebrow. Chen approached the bench with a tablet. "The email in question, Your Honor. We've provided copies to the defense during recess." The judge reviewed the document, her expression unchanging though her eyes lingered on certain passages. "Objection overruled. The witness may continue." Jasmine described a systematic campaign against Marcus, scheduled random locker searches, heightened scrutiny of his attendance record, and sudden reassessment of his previous work. All of it documented in emails, texts, and meeting notes where Victoria had been increasingly less cautious about her motivations. Did Mrs. Hargrove ever connect these actions to Ms. Johnson's tenant organizing? Chen asked. Yes. In one meeting, when another board member questioned why they were focusing so much attention on one student, Mrs. Hargrove said, "His mother should have thought about consequences before she started making trouble." Victoria's attorneys huddled in whispered consultation. The damage control strategy was visibly shifting from denial to mitigation. "No further questions," Chen said, returning to his seat beside Marcus. Preston approached for cross-examination, his earlier confidence now tempered with caution. "Ms. Williams, why did you leave your position with the Education Board?" "I resigned," Jasmine replied stiffly. "Were you asked to resign?" "No." "Were there issues with your job performance?" Jasmine adjusted her glasses. "My performance reviews were consistently excellent." "Then why leave a secure position?" She met Victoria's gaze directly. "Because I could no longer be part of a system that deliberately harmed students for personal vendettas." Preston tried another angle. "Did you take these records you claim to have kept with you when you left?" "I made copies of communications I believed showed misconduct." "So you stole confidential records?" Chen stood. "Objection. Argumentative and mischaracterizes the witness's testimony." "Sustained," Judge Michaels ruled. Preston tried again. "Did you have authorization to copy these records?" "I had authorization to access them as part of my job. I believed I had a moral obligation to preserve evidence of wrongdoing." "A moral obligation?" Preston repeated skeptically. "Or perhaps a financial motivation? Are you being compensated for your testimony today?" "Absolutely not," Jasmine replied, her voice firm. "I came forward because what happened to Marcus Johnson was wrong, and I couldn't live with my silence anymore." After several more failed attempts to discredit Jasmine, Preston returned to his seat. Victoria scribbled something on a notepad and shoved it toward him, but he subtly pushed it away, his expression grim. Chen called his next witness, Derek Davis, Marcus's former chemistry teacher. Davis, a thin man in his 50s with nervous hands, looked distinctly uncomfortable as he was sworn in. His eyes darted between Victoria and Marcus, never settling on either for long. "Mr. Davis," Chen began, "could you describe your interaction with Marcus regarding his science project?" Davis cleared his throat. "Marcus proposed testing water quality in various neighborhoods. I initially approved the project. Did you later discourage him from pursuing it?" "I suggested he might want to consider something less controversial." "Why was water testing controversial?" Davis hesitated. "I received concerns that the methodology might not be sound." "From whom did you receive these concerns?" "From Mrs. Hargrove." Chen approached with another document. "Is this the email you received?" Davis glanced at it and nodded reluctantly. "For the record, this email from Mrs. Hargrove to Mr. Davis states, and I quote, 'The Johnson Boys project could create unnecessary liability issues for the district if his testing suggests problems with properties connected to board members. Find a reason to redirect him to something less problematic.' Is that correct, Mr. Davis?" "Yes," Davis admitted, not meeting anyone's eyes. "And did you attempt to redirect Marcus as instructed?" "I told him his methodology wasn't rigorous enough." "Despite the fact that he was following EPA guidelines?" "Yes." "And when Marcus defended his work, did you tell him he was proving certain stereotypes right?" Davis looked down. "I regret that comment." "What did you mean by it?" "Objection," Preston called. "Calls for speculation about past state of mind." "Your Honor, I'm asking the witness to explain his own statement," Chen countered. "Overruled. The witness will answer." Davis's face flushed. "I implied he was being confrontational and aggressive when he was simply defending his work. It was It was a racially charged comment, and I'm ashamed of it." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Marcus sat perfectly still, his expression controlled despite the pain of hearing these admissions. "Why did you make that report claiming Marcus threatened you?" Mrs. Hargrove suggested that documenting the interaction as threatening would help establish a pattern of behavior. Victoria's pen clattered to the floor. Her attorney placed a restraining hand on her arm as she started to rise. "Did Marcus ever actually threaten you, Mr. Davis?" "No," Davis admitted. "He was passionate about his project, but never threatening." "One final question, Mr. Davis. Why are you telling the truth today when you filed a false report 3 years ago?" Davis finally looked directly at Marcus. "Because I can't sleep at night knowing what we did to that boy. I became a teacher to help students reach their potential, not to be part of destroying it." During cross-examination, Preston tried to suggest Davis was changing his story out of guilt rather than truth, but the damage was done. The chemistry teacher's testimony had corroborated everything in the emails and added the devastating admission of racial bias. After Davis stepped down, Chen called Marcus Johnson to the stand. A hush fell over the courtroom as Marcus rose, buttoned his jacket, and walked steadily to the witness box. At 17, he carried himself with remarkable poise for someone testifying about his own victimization. His mother dabbed at her eyes as he was sworn in. "Marcus," Chen began gently, "could you tell the court about your experience at Westfield Academy before these incidents began?" "I loved it there," Marcus replied, his voice clear and steady. "I had a 4.0 GPA, was on the debate team, and had started a science club for middle school students. My teachers said I had a good chance at scholarships to top universities." "When did things change?" "After my mother organized the Riverside Tenants Association. We received an eviction notice a month later, claiming renovations, though only the families involved in the association seemed to need renovating." Victoria shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "And at school?" "It started small. Suddenly my locker was being randomly searched. Assignments I'd turned in were marked as missing. Teachers who'd been friendly became distant." Marcus described the escalating pattern of harassment, the isolation, the whispers, and finally the fabricated incidents that led to his expulsion. "How did this affect your education?" "I had to transfer to Eastside High, which doesn't offer the advanced courses I was taking. My GPA dropped because of the disruption. College recruiters who'd been interested stopped calling." "And emotionally?" Marcus paused, the first crack in his composure. "I started doubting myself, wondering if maybe I had done something wrong. I couldn't sleep. I lost weight. I felt ashamed, like I'd let my mom down after all her sacrifices." Tanisha Johnson wiped away tears as her son spoke. "How did you discover what was really happening?" Marcus straightened his shoulders. "Ms. Williams contacted my mother anonymously at first. She said someone powerful had targeted me deliberately and suggested we look into Mrs. Hargrove's connections to Riverside Apartments. And what did you do with that information?" "I started researching, documenting the timeline of events. When Ms. Williams finally came forward with copies of the emails, everything fell into place." Chen nodded. No further questions. As Preston rose for cross-examination, Victoria passed him another note. He read it, frowned, and set it aside before approaching Marcus. "Mr. Johnson, isn't it possible that your academic difficulties were simply the result of not adjusting well to increased expectations?" Marcus met his gaze steadily. "No, sir. My difficulties began precisely when my mother challenged Mrs. Hargrove's business interests, and they followed exactly the pattern outlined in the emails we've presented." The afternoon continued with Preston trying different angles to undermine Marcus's testimony, but the young man remained composed and articulate. With each exchange, Victoria's expression grew more strained, her carefully constructed image crumbling under the weight of evidence and testimony. As the day's session neared its end, Judge Michaels announced, "We'll resume tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Mr. Chen, I understand you have additional witnesses." "Yes, Your Honor. We'll be calling former board members who received concerning communications from Mrs. Hargrove." Victoria's face went ashen. Tomorrow would bring even more damning testimony, more emails, more evidence of her systematic campaign against a teenager whose only crime was being the son of a woman who had stood up to her. As the courtroom emptied, Marcus walked past Victoria's table. She refused to look up, staring instead at her manicured nails against the polished wood. The contrast between her immaculate appearance and the ugliness of her actions hung in the air between them, a silent testament to the power of truth finally coming to light. Night fell over Westfield as both sides prepared for the next day's testimony. In Victoria Hargrove's expansive home office, her legal team had gathered for crisis management. Papers were scattered across her mahogany desk. Laptops open to various email chains now entered into evidence. The pristine space, usually a showcase of Victoria's carefully curated image, now resembled a war room in disarray. "We need to discuss settlement options again," Preston insisted, loosening his tie. Today was catastrophic. Victoria paced the room, a glass of scotch in hand. "I've told you I won't settle. It would be an admission of guilt." Rebecca Walsh, who had been reviewing the next batch of emails to be presented in court, looked up sharply. "Victoria, the emails are admissions of guilt. Explicit ones. Listen to this one to board member Richard Phillips. We both know Riverside needs to be cleared for the luxury development. The Johnson woman is rallying tenants and getting media attention. Her son is now doing the same at school with this water testing nonsense. I'm handling both problems." Victoria waved dismissively. "That's just business talk." "It's witness tampering, obstruction of justice, abuse of power, and possibly civil rights violations," Preston countered, his professional demeanor finally cracking. "And tomorrow, former board members will testify that you pressured them to vote for Marcus's expulsion by threatening their positions." "They can't prove that," Victoria snapped. Rebecca slid another printed email across the desk. This one literally says, "Remember who appointed you to this board, Richard. Vote correctly on the Johnson expulsion, or I'll find someone who understands loyalty." Victoria stared at her own words, the reality of her situation finally beginning to penetrate. "What are we looking at here?" she asked quietly. Preston exhaled slowly. "Best case scenario with settlement, 6 figures in damages, a public apology, and resignation from the education board. Worst case if we continue to trial? 7 figures in damages, potential criminal charges for misuse of public office, and your reputation destroyed. Your business would suffer enormously." "Criminal charges?" Victoria's voice wavered. "The DA's office has requested copies of all evidence presented," Rebecca confirmed. "They're monitoring the case." Victoria sank into her chair, the facade of invincibility finally crumbling. "What have I done?" Across town in their modest apartment, Marcus sat at the kitchen table with his mother and Attorney Chen, reviewing his testimony for the next day. "You were excellent today," Chen said. "Just remember to stay calm tomorrow, no matter what they throw at you." Marcus nodded, absently rearranging the salt and pepper shakers. "Do you think she understands yet? What she did to us?" Tanisha reached for her son's hand. "People like Victoria Hargrove rarely understand the damage they cause. They're too insulated by money and power. She'll understand when the jury delivers their verdict," Chen assured them. "The evidence is overwhelming." Tanisha's eyes filled with tears. 3 years. 3 years of watching my baby boy doubt himself, lose opportunities, question his worth. No verdict can give us back that time. Marcus squeezed his mother's hand. "But it might stop her from doing this to someone else." and maybe other people in power will think twice before abusing it. Chen observed the exchange with quiet admiration. Despite everything they'd endured, neither Marcus nor Tanisha had been broken by Victoria's campaign against them. If anything, it had forged them into stronger advocates, not just for themselves, but for their community. "There's something else you should know," Chen said, pulling out his phone to show them a news alert. "Your case is gaining attention. 3 other families have come forward claiming Victoria targeted their children after disputes with her company." Tanisha covered her mouth. "My God, how many lives has she damaged?" "We've started a support group," Marcus said quietly. "Students who were pushed out of Westfield Academy under suspicious circumstances. There are 15 of us now." Chen and Tanisha both turned to him in surprise. "When did you do this?" his mother asked. "After Ms. Williams first contacted us. I started reaching out, connecting the dots. Most of them are minorities. Most had parents who somehow crossed Victoria's path in business or politics." Chen made a note. "This could be crucial information. It establishes a pattern that goes beyond your individual case." Marcus nodded. "That's what I thought. Some of them are willing to testify if needed." The attorney shook his head in amazement. "You'd make an excellent lawyer someday, Marcus." "That's the plan," the teenager replied with quiet determination. "After everything we've been through, I want to make sure other families have someone fighting for them." The next morning, the courtroom was packed. News of the explosive testimony had spread, drawing media attention and community members. Victoria entered wearing a more subdued outfit than her previous power suits, a simple navy dress with minimal jewelry. Her team had clearly advised her to appear more sympathetic. Judge Michaels called the court to order promptly at 9, and Chen immediately called Richard Phillips, former Education Board member, to the stand. Phillips, a silver-haired man in his 60s with a distinguished bearing, had served on the board for 12 years before retiring the previous year. "Mr. Phillips," Chen began, "could you describe Mrs. Hargrove's leadership style on the Education Board?" Phillips glanced uncomfortably at Victoria. Mrs. Hargrove was forceful in her opinions. She expected board members to follow her lead on most issues. And if they didn't? There were consequences. Committee assignments would change, or suddenly their initiatives wouldn't receive funding. Was this approach applied to student disciplinary cases as well? Typically, the board doesn't get involved in individual student matters unless they reach the expulsion level. Mrs. Hargrove took an unusual interest in certain cases. Including Marcus Johnson's? Yes. She made it clear she expected us to vote for expulsion, despite some concerning inconsistencies in the documentation. Chen approached with printed emails. "Are these communications you received from Mrs. Hargrove regarding Marcus's case?" Phillips reviewed them and nodded gravely. "Yes." "Could you read the highlighted portion of the first email?" Phillips adjusted his glasses. "I need your vote on this, Richard. The Johnson boy is a problem that needs to be removed from Westfield Academy. His continued presence threatens everything we've built." "And this second email, sent when you expressed reservations?" "Remember who appointed you to this board, Richard. Vote correctly on the Johnson expulsion, or I'll find someone who understands loyalty." "How did you interpret that message?" Phillips straightened his shoulders. "As a threat. Vote her way or lose my position." "And did you vote for Marcus's expulsion?" "Yes," Phillips admitted, his voice heavy with regret. "I'm ashamed to say I put my position above doing what was right." "Why are you coming forward now?" The former board member looked directly at Marcus. "Because I've had to live with that decision for 3 years. When I saw this lawsuit in the news, I knew it was time to tell the truth." Victoria stared at the table, unable to meet Phillips's gaze as Preston rose for cross-examination. The defense attorney's questions focused on Phillips's failure to report Victoria's pressure at the time, suggesting his testimony was motivated by guilt rather than truth. Isn't it convenient that you found your moral compass now, when it costs you nothing? Preston asked. Phillips didn't flinch. There's nothing convenient about admitting you failed a child when you had the power to protect them. I'll have to live with that knowledge for the rest of my life. As Phillips stepped down, Chen called 2 more former board members who testified to similar pressure from Victoria regarding Marcus's case. Each email presented painted a clearer picture of a calculated campaign to remove him from the school as retribution against his mother. During the morning break, Preston cornered Victoria in the conference room. This is getting worse by the hour. The jury is seeing a pattern of deliberate abuse of power. We need to settle before Chen calls his next witnesses. Victoria's hands trembled slightly as she sipped her water. What's left? What else could possibly come out? Rebecca entered, her expression grim. Chen just submitted another batch of evidence. Emails between you and the Westfield Academy College counselor, instructing her not to submit Marcus's recommendation letters to universities that had expressed interest. Victoria closed her eyes. I forgot about those. You deliberately sabotaged a child's college prospects out of spite, Preston said flatly. No jury in the world will sympathize with that. Let me approach Chen about settlement terms before this gets worse. After a moment, Victoria nodded, her shoulders slumping in defeat. Fine. See what they want. Preston returned 15 minutes later, his expression unreadable. They're willing to discuss settlement, but they have conditions beyond money. What conditions? Public apology, resignation from the education board, and... Preston hesitated. What else? Victoria demanded. They want you to meet privately with Marcus and the other students from his support group, 15 in all, and hear directly from them how your actions impacted their lives. Victoria blanched. Absolutely not. I won't subject myself to that. Then we continue with trial, Preston said simply. Chen has scheduled those 15 students to testify one by one over the next 3 days. Each will tell their story to the jury, the media, and the public. Your choice. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Michaels returned from break. Victoria's eyes found Marcus across the room. For the first time, she truly saw him. Not as an obstacle or a problem to be solved, but as a young man whose future she had deliberately tried to destroy. The weight of that realization settled over her like a shroud. Mr. Chen, the judge said, you may call your next witness. Chen stood. Your Honor, we've been approached about potential settlement discussions. We request a 1-hour recess to explore this possibility. Judge Michaels raised an eyebrow, looking between the parties. Granted. Court will recess for 1 hour. I expect an update on these discussions when we reconvene. As people filed out, Victoria remained seated, staring at her reflection in the polished table surface. The carefully constructed image she had maintained for decades was dissolving before her eyes, revealing something underneath that she hardly recognized and could no longer deny. The courthouse conference room felt smaller than its actual dimensions as the 2 legal teams faced each other across the polished table. Victoria sat rigidly beside Preston, while Chen and Marcus represented the plaintiff's side. Tanisha had chosen to wait outside, saying quietly to her son, "This is your moment. I trust you to know what's right." Preston opened with practiced diplomacy. "We appreciate your willingness to discuss settlement options. Mrs. Hargrove recognizes this situation has been difficult for everyone involved." Chen's expression remained neutral. "Let's be clear about what this situation is, Mr. Preston. Your client used her position of power to deliberately destroy a teenager's educational opportunities as revenge against his mother for tenant organizing activities that threatened her business interests." Victoria flinched at the blunt characterization, but didn't contradict it. "What are your terms?" Preston asked, getting straight to business. Chen slid a document across the table. $1 million in damages, public apology, resignation from the education board. and as I mentioned, private meetings with Marcus and the other affected students. Victoria stiffened. The financial terms are negotiable, but I won't subject myself to some public shaming ritual with these students. Marcus, who had remained silent until now, leaned forward slightly. It's not about shaming you, Mrs. Hargrove. It's about you hearing what your actions did to real people with real lives. Victoria avoided his gaze. My actions were regrettable. I acknowledge that. But the past can't be changed. No, Marcus agreed, his voice steady. It can't. I can't get back the 3 years you took from me. I can't undo the panic attacks before tests, wondering if I'm really good enough or if I only thought I was. I can't erase the nights my mother cried, blaming herself for what happened to me because she stood up to you. The room fell silent. Even Preston seemed momentarily at a loss. What you can do, Marcus continued, is look us in the eye and hear our stories. Not because it helps us, honestly, it probably won't, but because it might help you understand the real cost of using power the way you did. Victoria's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly. And if I refuse? Chen closed his folder. Then we continue with trial. The 15 students from Marcus's support group will testify one by one. Their stories and your emails about them will become public record. The media will cover every detail. You're blackmailing me, Victoria said, a hint of her usual sharpness returning. No, Marcus replied calmly. We're giving you a choice between private accountability and public exposure. You've denied us agency for years. Now we're reclaiming it. Victoria turned to Preston. Can they do this? They can call relevant witnesses, yes. And given what we've seen of your email habits, I suspect Chen has evidence connecting you to each of these students' situations. Victoria's attorney leaned closer, lowering his voice. Take the deal, Victoria. The financial terms are within insurance coverage. The board resignation was inevitable anyway. Meeting with the students is the only way to maintain any control over the narrative at this point. Rebecca Walsh, who had been silently observing, added, The DA's office is watching this case closely. Civil settlement doesn't preclude criminal charges, but showing remorse and making amends can influence their decisions. Victoria stared at her manicured hands, the weight of her actions finally becoming inescapable. I need time to consider this. You have 30 minutes before we return to court, Chen said, rising from his seat. Marcus, let's give Mrs. Hargrove some space to think. As they left, Victoria turned to her attorneys. Is there any other option? Preston shook his head. Not one that doesn't end with your reputation in tatters and possible criminal charges. Victoria, I've defended corporate executives, politicians, and celebrities in crisis. I've never seen evidence this damning. It's the private meetings that concern me, Victoria admitted. Facing those students is the price of your redemption, Rebecca finished. If you want any hope of preserving your business interests and avoiding criminal prosecution, you need to demonstrate genuine remorse. That starts with acknowledging the harm you've caused, not just to Marcus, but to all of them. Victoria paced the small room. What would these meetings even look like? You listen, Preston said simply. You don't defend, you don't explain, you don't minimize. You just listen to what they have to say. And then what? I just go on with my life minus one board position and some insurance money? Rebecca's voice hardened. No, Victoria. Then you live with what you've learned. You make different choices in the future. You use your considerable influence for something better than petty revenge against teenagers whose parents crossed you. The frankness from her own attorney startled Victoria. For years, she had surrounded herself with people who validated her decisions, who treated her wealth and position as justification for whatever actions she took. Now, even her paid counsel was holding up a mirror she couldn't avoid. Outside in the hallway, Marcus leaned against the wall, exhaling slowly. You okay? Chen asked. Yeah, it's just strange, sitting across from her, seeing her vulnerable. For 3 years, she was this untouchable force ruining my life from a distance. Power is often like that, intimidating from afar, but surprisingly fragile up close when confronted with truth. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Do you think she'll agree to meet with everyone? I think her alternatives are worse, and she's finally realizing it. Chen checked his watch. We should head back in. Judge Michaels won't wait. When court reconvened, all eyes turned to the attorneys as they approached the bench. Judge Michaels leaned forward, speaking quietly. Have you reached an agreement? Preston glanced at Chen before responding. We're making progress, Your Honor, but need additional time to finalize terms. Very well, I'll grant a 2-hour recess, but I expect a definitive answer when we return. As the courtroom began to clear, Victoria remained seated, staring straight ahead. The carefully constructed facade she had maintained throughout her career was crumbling. Each email presented in court had stripped away another layer of deniability until she sat exposed. Not as the community leader and businesswoman she pretended to be, but as someone who had deliberately used her power to harm a child for the crime of being his mother's son. When the conference room door closed again, Victoria spoke first. I want to see all the evidence you have, everything, before I agree to anything. Chen exchanged glances with Marcus before nodding. Fair enough. For the next hour, Victoria silently reviewed page after page of her own words. Emails targeting not just Marcus but other students whose parents had somehow crossed her path. Notes to administrators questioning certain students' test scores or attendance records. Directives to create disciplinary paper trails where none had existed. Strategies for blocking scholarships and college recommendations. With each document, her face grew paler. Seeing it all laid out chronologically made the pattern undeniable, even to her. I didn't realize, she began, then stopped, the inadequacy of those words hanging in the air. Didn't realize what? Marcus asked quietly. That we were real people? That we had dreams and feelings? Or just that someone would eventually connect the dots? Victoria looked at him directly for the first time. Both, I suppose. When you have power for long enough, you stop seeing the individuals affected by your decisions. They become abstractions, problems to solve, obstacles to remove. We weren't abstractions, Mrs. Hargrove. We were kids. I was 14 when you started targeting me. Victoria set down the final page, her hands trembling slightly. I'll agree to your terms. All of them. Chen began outlining the settlement details, but Victoria seemed distracted, still processing the evidence of her own actions. Preston drafted the formal agreement while Rebecca contacted the insurance company to authorize the payment. As they prepared to inform the judge, Victoria suddenly turned to Marcus. May I ask you something? The teenager nodded cautiously. When did you know? When did you realize what was happening wasn't random bad luck but a deliberate campaign? Marcus considered the question. I think part of me always knew. The timing was too coincidental. My mother stands up to you, and suddenly my life falls apart. But I didn't have proof until Ms. Williams came forward. Even then I doubted myself. That's what you took from me, beyond the opportunities. My confidence in my own perceptions, my trust in authority. Victoria absorbed this, nodding slowly. And the other students? How did you find them? Once I started looking, the pattern was obvious. Most were minorities. Most had parents who had some conflict with you or your company. All experienced sudden, unexplained academic or disciplinary issues after those conflicts. And you brought them together? Someone had to, Marcus said simply. The system certainly wasn't protecting us. When court resumed, Preston announced the settlement agreement. Judge Michaels reviewed the terms carefully before addressing Victoria directly. "Mrs. Hargrove, are you entering this agreement voluntarily and with full understanding of its terms?" Victoria stood, her voice subdued. "Yes, Your Honor." "Including the non-monetary provisions regarding board resignation and private meetings with affected students?" "Yes." Judge Michaels turned to Marcus. "Mr. Johnson, do you believe this settlement adequately addresses the harm you've suffered?" Marcus rose, standing tall despite the weight of the moment. "No amount of money can fully address what happened, Your Honor, but the accountability provisions are important to me and the other students. We accept the terms." As the judge finalized the settlement, a single tear slid down Victoria's cheek, the first crack in the dam of her emotions. It was not a tear of remorse, not yet. It was the tear of someone seeing their carefully constructed world dismantled, their power diminished, their actions exposed. But as she signed the final documents, making official her accountability for years of targeted abuse, Victoria Hargrove began to understand that this ending was also a beginning, a chance to face the true impact of her actions and perhaps eventually find a path to genuine redemption. Whether she would take that path remained to be seen. The news of Victoria Hargrove's settlement exploded across Westfield like a thunderclap. Local papers ran front-page headlines. "Prominent CEO admits to targeting students. Education Board Chair resigns in disgrace. Hargrove to pay $1 million in discrimination case." Her carefully cultivated image as a philanthropist and community leader crumbled overnight, replaced by public scrutiny of her business practices and growing questions about other potential abuses of power. 3 days after the settlement, Victoria sat alone in her home office, scrolling through emails from business associates suddenly too busy for their regular lunches, invitations to charity events quietly rescinded, and a particularly pointed message from the Chamber of Commerce suggesting she take time away from public-facing roles. The social ostracism was swift and merciless. The same community that had celebrated her success now seemed eager to distance itself from her disgrace. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Rebecca Walsh entered with a folder tucked under her arm, her expression businesslike. "The schedule for the student meetings," she explained, placing the folder on Victoria's desk. "Marcus and Mr. Chen have organized them over the next 2 weeks. Each student has chosen a location where they feel comfortable. Some have requested family members or counselors present." Victoria eyed the folder without opening it. "And what exactly am I supposed to say to these children?" "Nothing, initially. You're there to listen." Rebecca's tone softened slightly. "Victoria, this isn't just a box to check. These meetings are your opportunity to understand the real impact of your actions and possibly begin to make amends." "Make amends," Victoria repeated hollowly. "How does one make amends for derailing a child's future?" "That's what you need to figure out." Rebecca checked her watch. "The first meeting is tomorrow. Marcus Johnson. He's chosen the Riverside Community Center, where his mother's tenant organization still meets." Victoria's jaw tightened. "Of course he has. He could have chosen a much more public venue. He's protecting your dignity more than you protected his." Rebecca gathered her papers. "I'll pick you up at 2. Wear something modest. This isn't a board meeting or a photo opportunity." After Rebecca left, Victoria finally opened the folder. 15 names, 15 young lives she had impacted through calculated acts of retribution. Some she recognized immediately. Others were just vague memories of problems she had solved. Each name now came with a face, school photos paper-clipped to brief descriptions of their current situations. Marcus Johnson, attending Eastside High. GPA dropped from 4.0 to 3.2 after expulsion. Abandoned science focus. Now interested in law and social justice. Zoe Ramirez, transferred to public school after scholarship revocation. working part-time to save for community college. Original goal, pediatric medicine. Devon, Washington, repeated 11th grade after mid-year transfer. Athletic scholarship prospects diminished. Currently working night shifts at warehouse. Victoria forced herself to read each profile, absorbing the ripple effects of her vindictiveness. By the time she reached the 15th name, her hands were shaking. The next day, Rebecca drove Victoria to the Riverside Community Center, a modest building nestled between the original Riverside apartments, now partially renovated but still home to many original tenants, and the newer luxury development that Victoria's company had eventually built on adjacent land. The tenant organization successfully negotiated with your replacement at Westfield Properties, Rebecca explained as they pulled into the parking lot. They won relocation assistance for displaced residents and a guarantee that 30% of units would remain affordable. Victoria stared at the building. Tanisha Johnson accomplished all that? She's quite remarkable, currently completing a degree in urban planning while working full-time. Rebecca turned off the engine. This isn't just about Marcus, Victoria. This is about understanding that the people you tried to dismiss as obstacles were actually building something valuable. Inside, the community room was simply furnished with mismatched chairs arranged in a small circle. Marcus was already there, along with Chen and a woman Victoria recognized as Dr. Lydia Bennett, a respected child psychologist. "Thank you for coming, Mrs. Hargrove," Marcus said formally, gesturing to an empty chair. Victoria sat down stiffly, hyper-aware of the subtle power shift. Here, in this place built by the community she had tried to displace, she was not the authority. She was the supplicant. "Dr. Bennett will be facilitating our conversation," Marcus explained. "She's been working with our student support group and has agreed to help with all 15 meetings." The psychologist nodded. "I want to establish some ground rules. These sessions are about honest communication and understanding, not punishment or humiliation. Marcus will share his experience, and you'll have an opportunity to respond. If things become too intense for either of you, we'll take a break. Does that sound reasonable?" Victoria nodded mutely. Marcus took a deep breath and began. What followed was the most excruciating 90 minutes of Victoria Hargrove's life. Marcus spoke without anger, but with devastating clarity about how her campaign against him had affected every aspect of his existence, academically, socially, psychologically. He described the confusion of being suddenly treated as a problem after years of being celebrated as a promising student, the isolation as teachers and classmates withdrew, the self-doubt that plagued him even now. "The worst part wasn't the expulsion," he said quietly. "It was watching my mother blame herself. She thought standing up for our community had cost me my future. For months, she apologized to me almost every night." Victoria's carefully maintained composure finally cracked. Tears welled in her eyes, not the calculated display of emotion she had occasionally deployed in board meetings, but a genuine response to the pain she had caused. "Why?" Marcus asked simply. "That's what I need to understand. Why target me instead of fighting my mother's organization directly?" Victoria wiped her eyes, struggling to articulate what had seemed so justified at the time. "Your mother was formidable. Direct opposition only seemed to strengthen her resolve. But I knew from experience that parents are most vulnerable through their children. It seemed efficient." "Efficient," Marcus repeated. "You ruined my life because it was efficient." "I didn't think of it as ruining your life," Victoria admitted. "In my mind, you were just a piece on the board, a way to pressure your mother into backing down. I never considered you as a person with dreams and potential. I never allowed myself to think about the real impact of what I was doing." "But why did my mother's tenant organizing bother you so much? Your company is worth millions. The rent increases that displaced us weren't going to make or break Westfield Properties." Victoria was silent for a long moment, confronting a truth she had never acknowledged even to herself. It wasn't about the money. It was about control. Your mother challenged my authority, made me look vulnerable in front of investors and partners. No one had done that successfully in years. Dr. Bennett interjected gently. So your response was to reassert control by targeting her son? Yes, Victoria whispered, the admission hanging heavily in the air. It sounds monstrous now, saying it aloud. It was monstrous, Marcus said evenly. You used your power to punish a child for his mother's activism. You knew exactly what you were doing with each email, each manipulated report, each fabricated incident. Victoria couldn't meet his eyes. Yes. Do you understand now why we insisted on these meetings? Why a monetary settlement wasn't enough? She nodded slowly. Because money doesn't create accountability. It doesn't force me to see the real human cost of my actions. Exactly. Marcus leaned forward. The 14 other students you'll meet are all dealing with the aftermath of your efficiency. Some have recovered better than others. But all of us lost something we can never get back. Time, opportunities, belief in a fair system. As the session concluded, Victoria found herself at a loss for words. The carefully prepared statement her PR team had crafted seemed hollow in the face of Marcus's dignity and resilience. I'm sorry, she finally said, the words unfamiliar on her tongue. It's inadequate, but I am truly sorry for what I did to you. Marcus studied her for a long moment. I believe you're sorry you got caught. I'm not sure yet if you're sorry you did it. Maybe after 14 more meetings, you'll know the difference. As Victoria stepped back into the sunlight, Rebecca waiting by the car, she felt something unfamiliar. A weight of genuine shame, yes, but also something else. A recognition that the armor of wealth and influence she had worn for decades had not only insulated her from consequences, but also from her own humanity. She had 13 more meetings to face, 13 more young lives to understand, 13 more mirrors to gaze into and confront what she had become. How did it go? Rebecca asked as Victoria slid into the passenger seat. Victoria stared out the window at the community center, where Marcus remained inside, likely debriefing with Dr. Bennett. I think, she said slowly, that I have been a monster for much longer than I realized. Rebecca started the car. Recognizing that is the first step. What matters now is what you do with that recognition. As they drove away, Victoria wondered if redemption was even possible after such calculated cruelty, and if she had the courage to find out. 3 days after meeting Marcus, Victoria found herself sitting in the back room of a small cafe where Zoe Ramirez waited at a corner table. The 16-year-old girl looked much older than her years, dark circles under her eyes testifying to the adult responsibilities she now carried. Zoe works 30 hours a week here, Dr. Bennett explained quietly as they approached. Her manager gave her the afternoon off for this meeting but couldn't afford to close the back room. Victoria nodded, noting the contrast between this setting and her usual business lunches at Westfield's most exclusive restaurants. The cafe smelled of coffee and pastries, the sounds of the busy kitchen providing a constant backdrop. Mrs. Hargrove, Zoe acknowledged stiffly, not offering her hand. Her mother sat protectively beside her, expression guarded. Thank you for agreeing to meet, Victoria replied, taking the seat across from them. Unlike Marcus's measured, articulate account, Zoe's story came in emotional bursts. 2 years earlier, her father had organized fellow maintenance workers at Victoria's office complex to protest unsafe working conditions. Within weeks, Zoe's academic scholarship to Westfield Academy, awarded for her exceptional talent in mathematics, was reassessed due to budget constraints. I had planned my whole life around that scholarship, Zoe explained, her voice tight. My college applications, my extracurriculars, everything was building toward pre-med, Now I'm working the morning shift here before school and weekends to save for community college." Victoria looked at the girl's hands, reddened from dishwater, a small burn mark on one wrist. Hands that should have been holding scientific calculators and textbooks, not scrubbing coffee cups and bussing tables. "The email from you to the scholarship committee said I no longer exemplified Westfield values," Zoe continued. "I printed it out. I read it so many times, trying to understand what I'd done wrong." She pulled a folded paper from her pocket. Victoria's own words, creased and worn from repeated handling. "Did you even know who I was when you wrote this? Did you know I had the highest math scores in the district? That I was tutoring younger students on weekends?" "No," Victoria admitted. "I only knew your last name matched the maintenance worker causing problems." Zoe's mother made a small, pained sound. "Causing problems? My husband was reporting chemical exposure that sent 3 workers to the hospital." Victoria had no response. The incident had been a minor irritation in her busy schedule, a workplace safety complaint that threatened construction deadlines. She had dealt with it the same way she handled all obstacles, efficiently, ruthlessly, without consideration for the human beings involved. "What are your plans now?" Victoria asked Zoe after an uncomfortable silence. "Community college for 2 years, then transfer to state university if I can afford it. The medical school timeline is complicated now." Zoe's voice wavered. "I lost my study group, my advanced placement credits, my science club, all the things that would have made my applications competitive." For the first time, Victoria truly considered the cascading consequences of her actions. How one vindictive email had altered this girl's entire life trajectory, all because her father had dared to advocate for basic workplace safety. "I'm sorry, Zoe," Victoria said, the words still feeling foreign on her tongue. "What I did was inexcusable." "Yes, it was," Zoe agreed simply. "And sorry doesn't get me back into AP calculus or restore my college savings that now goes toward rent since my dad was blacklisted from maintenance jobs in this city." As the meeting concluded, Victoria felt hollowed out. Unlike Marcus, who had channeled his experience into advocacy, Zoe seemed diminished by what had happened. Her dreams not redirected but reduced, her potential constrained by adult worries no teenager should carry. Outside the cafe, Rebecca waited as always. "How was it?" "Worse than yesterday," Victoria replied, her voice barely audible. "With Marcus, I at least felt he might recover. Zoe seems broken." "Some wounds heal differently than others," Rebecca said. "That's why these meetings matter. You're seeing the full spectrum of harm you caused." The next day brought Victoria to the public library where Devin Washington waited with his grandmother, his face a mask of barely contained anger. At 19, he should have been in his freshman year of college. Instead, he was working night shifts at a warehouse, his promising basketball career derailed after Victoria had engineered his mid-year transfer by falsely reporting a residency violation. "Do you know what happens when you pull a kid out of school halfway through junior year?" he asked without preamble. "Credits don't transfer, right? Coaches don't know you. College recruiters have already made their lists." Devin's grandmother, Mrs. Washington, placed a weathered hand on his arm. "Easy, child." "No, Grandma. She needs to hear this." Devin leaned forward. "My whole life was basketball. Not because I didn't have brains, I had a 3.8 GPA, but because that scholarship was my only shot at college. We don't have college funds or connections. Ball was my way out." Victoria remembered the email that had started it all. Devin's grandmother had spoken at a city council meeting against her company's tax abatement request for a new development. A simple public comment from a senior citizen had triggered Victoria's vindictive response. "I had scouts from 3 universities coming to see me play in the championship game," Devin continued. "But I wasn't there. I was sitting in a new counselor's office at a new school, being told half my credits wouldn't transfer, and I couldn't join their basketball team mid-season. Mrs. Washington spoke up, her voice gentle but firm. My boy cried for the first time since he was 12 years old. Not because of basketball, but because he felt he'd failed me after I raised him when his mama passed. Victoria felt her chest tighten. I never considered— Of course you didn't, Devon interrupted. People like you never do. We're just collateral damage in your business deals and power plays. Unlike the previous meetings, Victoria found no opening for apology here, no moment of connection or understanding. Devon's anger was a solid wall, and she recognized he had every right to it. What can I do? She asked finally, the question directed more to Dr. Bennett than to Devon. It was Mrs. Washington who answered. You can't undo what's done, but you can make sure that boy gets his education. Not charity, restitution. After the meeting, Victoria sat in Rebecca's car in silence for several minutes before speaking. Devon Washington's college fund. I want to establish it today. Full ride, including living expenses. Rebecca glanced at her. That's a start, but throwing money at the problem— I know it doesn't fix everything, Victoria interrupted, but it's something concrete I can do right now, while I figure out the rest. That evening, Victoria sat in her home office, surrounded by the trappings of success that had once seemed so important. On her desk lay the profiles of the 12 students she had yet to meet. Behind them stood a shelf of industry awards and recognition, symbols of a success built partially through the systematic destruction of young lives that threatened her interests. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Heard you met with Devon today. He's still angry, and that's valid. But he said you listened. That matters. Victoria stared at the message, surprised that Marcus was monitoring her progress through these meetings. She typed back, I did listen. I'm starting to understand. Still have a long way to go. The reply came quickly. Yes, you do. See you tomorrow at the group session. Victoria had almost forgotten. Between the individual meetings, she had agreed to attend the student support group that Marcus had formed. Tomorrow she would face all 15 students together, not from a position of power, but as someone being held accountable for her actions. As she prepared for bed, Victoria caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror. The perfectly coiffed hair and designer clothes couldn't disguise the fundamental change taking place within her. For the first time in decades, she was seeing herself clearly, not as the successful businesswoman and philanthropist she had pretended to be, but as someone who had weaponized her privilege and power against children. The realization brought no comfort, but it did bring clarity. The path to redemption, if one existed, wouldn't be found in charitable donations or public apologies. It would be built through the painful process of facing each young person whose life she had altered, understanding the full impact of her actions, and finding ways to make meaningful amends. Victoria turned away from the mirror, the weight of tomorrow's group session already pressing on her chest. Facing one student at a time had been excruciating. Facing all 15 together would require a courage she wasn't sure she possessed. Yet something in Marcus's text gave her a fragile hope. He had acknowledged that listening mattered. Perhaps that was the beginning, not of forgiveness, which she had no right to expect, but of a path toward becoming someone worthy of the second chance these young people were reluctantly giving her. The community room at Eastside High School seemed to shrink as Victoria entered. 15 young faces turned toward her, expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Marcus stood at the front, assuming a leadership role that seemed natural to him despite his youth. Thank you all for coming, he began, addressing both his peers and Victoria. We agreed that this group session would give everyone a chance to speak, even those who didn't want individual meetings. Victoria took the single empty chair in the circle, acutely aware of her designer outfit despite Rebecca's advice to dress modestly. Even in her most casual clothes, The wealth gap between her and these students was painfully evident. Dr. Bennett sat beside Marcus, her notepad ready. Remember our guidelines. We speak our truths without personal attacks. We listen without interrupting. This is about understanding and accountability, not revenge. A girl with close-cropped hair and piercing eyes spoke first. I'm Amara Okafor. You don't know me personally, but you knew my mother. She led the petition against your company's waste disposal practices near Riverdale Elementary. Victoria vaguely remembered the situation, an environmental complaint that had threatened to delay construction on a major project. 2 weeks after the petition made the news, my advanced science class was suddenly oversubscribed, and I was transferred to standard classes despite having the highest grades. Amara's voice remained steady. When my mother complained, she was told the decision was based on overall student performance metrics. We didn't connect it to you until Marcus found us. One by one, the students shared similar stories. A boy whose father had opposed Victoria's bid for a city contract found himself suddenly cut from the debate team for behavioral issues that had never existed before. A girl whose aunt had organized community opposition to a Westfield development was mysteriously removed from the student council after 3 years of exemplary leadership. Some stories Victoria remembered initiating. Others must have been carried out by subordinates who understood her unspoken expectations of retaliation against anyone who challenged her interests. What strikes me, said a boy named Tyler, whose mother had been a former employee who filed a workplace discrimination complaint, is how creative you were in punishing us. You never did the same thing twice, almost like you enjoyed finding unique ways to hurt each of us. Victoria felt the blood drain from her face. I didn't what? Another student interrupted. Didn't think about how it felt to be suddenly treated like you're crazy for noticing what was happening? To have adults you trusted telling you that your academic decline was your own fault? Or how about the isolation, added Zoe, whom Victoria had met the previous day. Friends stop inviting you places because you're suddenly labeled a problem student. Teachers who used to encourage you start keeping their distance. Victoria forced herself to maintain eye contact, despite the shame burning through her. This was the full reckoning she had agreed to face, not just individual grievances, but the pattern of destruction she had orchestrated. What I don't understand, said a quiet voice from the corner, is why. The speaker was a boy younger than the others, perhaps 14. What did you get out of ruining our lives? You're already rich and powerful. What was the point? The simple question cut through Victoria's defenses more effectively than any accusation. What had been the point? The business advantages gained from silencing these families' complaints had been minimal compared to Westfield's overall profits. The personal satisfaction of asserting her authority had been fleeting at best. I told myself it was about protecting my business interests, she began slowly, addressing the boy directly. But the truth I'm only now beginning to face, is that I couldn't tolerate being challenged. Anyone who questioned my authority became an enemy to be neutralized, and I discovered that targeting children was the most efficient way to silence their parents. A heavy silence fell over the room. That's messed up, someone finally said, like seriously psychopathic. Victoria didn't argue with the assessment. It was messed up. Only now, confronted with the collective trauma she had caused, could she see how fundamentally broken her moral compass had become. Yes, she agreed softly. It was. Marcus stepped forward again. We didn't bring you here to be vilified, Mrs. Hargrove. We brought you here because we want to know what happens next. The settlement checks will help our families financially. Your resignation from the board removes your ability to hurt other students, but none of that undoes the damage or prevents someone else from doing the same thing. Victoria looked around the circle, meeting the eyes of each student. What would you have me do? Amara spoke up immediately. Use your influence to change the system that allowed this to happen. One person shouldn't have the power to derail students' educations as retaliation against their parents. Scholarships and funding for those of us trying to recover academically, added Devon. Not as charity, but as restitution. A formal apology to each family, said Tyler. Public acknowledgement of what you did so our parents don't have to keep feeling like they failed us somehow. As the students outlined their expectations, Victoria realized they weren't demanding her destruction. They wanted meaningful repair of the harm she had caused and systemic changes to prevent similar abuses of power. There's one more thing, Marcus said when the others had finished. We want you to meet with the current education board and explain exactly how you manipulated the system. They need to understand the vulnerabilities you exploited so they can close those loopholes. Victoria's stomach clenched at the thought of confessing her methods to her former colleagues. It would mean complete professional humiliation, the final dismantling of the reputation she had spent decades building. That's a significant ask, she said carefully. So was asking us to rebuild our lives after you shattered them, Zoe replied, her voice calm but firm. Victoria looked at these young people, children she had viewed as collateral damage in her power plays, and saw not victims, but survivors who had found their collective voice. They were offering her a path toward redemption that required not just her money, but her active participation in repairing the systems she had corrupted. I'll do it, she said finally. All of it. The board meeting, the public apologies, the scholarships, the systemic reforms, whatever it takes. Dr. Bennett made a note in her pad. This is an important commitment, Mrs. Hargrove. These young people are placing their trust in your word after experiencing profound betrayal at your hands. I understand that, Victoria replied, and I understand that promises mean nothing without actions to back them up. I'll start by scheduling the board meeting this week. As the session concluded, Victoria found herself lingering, watching as the students gathered their things. Some spoke quietly in pairs, others checked phones or reviewed homework. Normal teenage activities that contrasted sharply with the extraordinary resilience they had demonstrated in confronting her. Marcus approached as she prepared to leave. You did better than I expected today. It was the least I could do, Victoria replied. Literally the very least. True, he acknowledged with the hint of a smile. But it's a start. Can I ask you something? Victoria said hesitantly. When Marcus nodded, she continued. Why did you organize all this? You could have taken the settlement money and moved on with your life. Why take on the responsibility of bringing everyone together? Marcus considered the question. When I realized what you'd done to me wasn't unique, that there were others, I couldn't just walk away. That would have made me like you, only caring about my own situation. The simple answer held no accusation, but Victoria felt its truth like a physical blow. She had spent decades caring only about her own interests, viewing others as either useful tools or obstacles to be removed. You're a remarkable young man, Marcus Johnson, she said quietly. The world is lucky your mother raised you and not someone like me. She'd say it takes a village, Marcus replied, which is why we're all here. As Victoria left the school, Rebecca waiting as always by the car, she felt simultaneously drained and somehow lighter. The weight of accountability was heavy, but it was an honest weight, perhaps the first truly honest thing she had carried in years. How did it go? Rebecca asked. They're giving me a chance to become a decent human being, Victoria replied. It's more than I deserve. Rebecca studied her client with new interest. And is that what you want? To become a decent human being? Victoria looked back at the school building where 15 young lives continued, despite her best efforts to derail them. Yes, she said simply. I think it is. That night, Victoria sat at her desk drafting emails, not to manipulate or destroy, but to begin making amends. A message to the education board requesting an emergency meeting. Another to her company's foundation director about establishing a scholarship fund for affected students. A third to her PR team, instructing them to prepare public apologies that acknowledged her wrongdoing without qualifications or excuses. Each keystroke felt like a small step away from the person she had been and toward the person she might yet become. The path ahead was long and uncertain, but for the first time in decades, Victoria Hargrove found herself genuinely interested in someone other than herself, 15 someones to be exact, whose forgiveness she had no right to expect, but whose futures she now felt responsible for helping to rebuild. The Westfield Education Board meeting room fell silent as Victoria took her place at the podium. 1 week after facing the students as a group, she now stood before her former colleagues, people who had once deferred to her authority without question. The same board members who had rubber-stamped her decisions looked the other way when procedures were bent and never asked too many uncomfortable questions. They watched her now with a mixture of wariness and curiosity. Her resignation had been announced with the standard platitudes about pursuing other opportunities, but rumors about the lawsuit settlement had spread throughout Westfield's power circles. "Thank you for allowing me to speak today," Victoria began, her voice steadier than she felt. "I've asked for this meeting to disclose information vital to the integrity of this institution." In the audience section, Marcus sat with Attorney Chen and several other students from the support group. Their presence had been Victoria's idea, a way to ensure she couldn't soften her admissions or minimize the damage she had caused. "For the past 7 years as board chairwoman, I systematically abused my position to target specific students as retaliation against their parents for actions unrelated to education." The board members exchanged glances, some leaning forward in surprise, others sitting back as if trying to distance themselves from her words. "I manipulated disciplinary proceedings, interfered with academic placements, blocked scholarship awards, and engineered situations designed to force targeted students out of Westfield Academy. I did this using methods that exploited vulnerabilities in your oversight systems." Victoria proceeded to detail those methods: the subtle pressuring of teachers to find fault with certain students' work, the strategic reassignment of counselors who asked too many questions, the deliberate misrepresentation of discipline statistics to justify harsher policies for minor infractions. I maintained separate email accounts to direct these activities, kept unofficial records of problem families, and coordinated with certain administrative staff to implement my agenda while maintaining plausible deniability. As she spoke, Victoria distributed a document she had prepared, a comprehensive list of the system vulnerabilities she had exploited, with specific recommendations for closing those loopholes. It was, in essence, a blueprint of her own methods offered up for dismantling. Board member Richard Phillips, who had testified about Victoria's pressure tactics during the trial, finally broke the stunned silence. "Why are you telling us this now, Victoria? The lawsuit is settled. You could have walked away." Victoria glanced at Marcus before answering. "Because the settlement wasn't just about money. It was about accountability and ensuring this doesn't happen to other students. These young people demanded better from me, and now I'm demanding better from all of you." "Are you suggesting we were complicit?" asked another board member defensively. "I'm stating that I deliberately created a culture where asking questions was discouraged and raising concerns was punished. But yes, there were moments when more scrutiny from this board could have stopped me." Victoria's gaze swept across the room. "We all failed these students." The board chair, a woman who had been appointed after Victoria's resignation, leaned forward. "What exactly are you asking us to do?" "Implement the oversight reforms outlined in the document I've provided. Establish an independent review process for all expulsions and disciplinary actions with disproportionate impacts on minority students. Create an anonymous reporting system for educators who witness abuses of power." Victoria continued with a list of specific recommendations developed in consultation with Marcus and the other students. Some board members took notes, others sat with arms crossed, clearly uncomfortable with both her admissions and her demands. Finally, Victoria concluded, I believe the board should issue a formal apology to every student affected by my actions and review their academic records for possible reinstatement or remediation. When the public comment period opened, Marcus was the first to approach the podium. His presence commanded attention despite his youth. What Mrs. Hargrove has described isn't just about one person abusing power, he said. It's about a system that allowed that abuse to continue unchallenged for years. My question to this board is simple. What will you do differently now that you can no longer pretend not to know? The meeting continued for another hour, with board members alternating between defensive posturing and genuine concern. By the end, they had agreed to form a special committee to review Victoria's recommendations and develop an implementation plan. Outside the building afterward, Victoria found herself standing awkwardly with Marcus and the other students. That went better than I expected, Marcus admitted. I thought they'd just dismiss everything once you finished speaking. They can't, Victoria replied. Not with the evidence so clearly presented and witnesses in the room. Plus, the media will be watching now. Indeed, several local reporters had attended the meeting, and Victoria had provided them with copies of the same documents she had given the board. The story was already breaking online. Former board chair admits to systemic targeting of students. What's next on your accountability tour? Asked Zoe, who had become increasingly engaged in the process since their initial meeting. Meeting with Westfield Academy administration tomorrow, Victoria answered. Then individual apologies to each of your families, as promised. The students nodded, some still skeptical of her commitment, others beginning to accept that her remorse might be genuine. The following days passed in a blur of difficult conversations. Victoria sat across from parents whose children she had harmed, explaining exactly what she had done and why. Some responded with cold anger, others with tearful questions about how they could have protected their children. One father simply sat in silence for the entire meeting, his disappointment more devastating than any words could have been. Throughout this process, Victoria maintained regular communication with Marcus, who had emerged as the unofficial leader of the group and the measure by which her efforts at amends were judged. The Scholarship Foundation is set up, she told him during one of their check-in calls. Independent board, transparent funding, guaranteed support for all 15 of you through college and graduate school if you choose that path. And the community center renovation? Contractors start next week. The tenant association will have full approval rights on the design. Marcus paused. You know this doesn't fix everything, right? Of course not, Victoria acknowledged. Nothing can undo the harm I caused, but it's a beginning. 2 weeks after the board meeting, Victoria faced perhaps her most challenging commitment, a community forum at Eastside High School where parents, teachers, and students could ask questions about what had happened and how similar abuses could be prevented in the future. The auditorium was packed, the atmosphere tense as Victoria took the stage alongside Dr. Bennett, Marcus, and several education advocates. For 3 hours, she answered questions honestly, never deflecting responsibility or minimizing the impact of her actions. What made you change? Asked one mother whose daughter had narrowly escaped Victoria's retribution. You spent years destroying young lives without apparent remorse. Why should we believe you're different now? Victoria considered the question carefully. I'm not asking you to believe I'm different. I'm asking you to hold me accountable for my actions and judge me by what I do now, not what I say. As the forum concluded, Victoria found herself mentally exhausted but somehow more centered than she'd felt in years. The persona she had maintained for so long, the untouchable, unapologetic power broker, had been completely dismantled. In its place was something raw and unformed, painful but potentially authentic. Outside the school, she found Marcus waiting. "You did well in there," he said, surprising her with the assessment. "You didn't make excuses." "I'm learning," Victoria replied, slowly. They walked together toward the parking lot where Rebecca waited with the car. "I've been thinking about what happens after all this," Marcus said. "After the apologies and the reforms and the scholarships." "What do you mean?" "I mean, what will you do with the rest of your life? Will you go back to business as usual, just without targeting students? Or will this experience actually change how you use your power and privilege going forward?" It was the question Victoria had been avoiding, the one that reached beyond making amends to these specific students and touched on her fundamental values and identity. "I don't know yet," she admitted. "For the first time in decades, I'm questioning everything about who I've been and what I've prioritized. That's disorienting." Marcus nodded. "That's how all of us felt when you upended our lives. Disoriented, questioning everything we thought we knew." The parallel wasn't lost on Victoria. "I suppose that's fitting." "Just don't waste it," Marcus said as they reached the car. "Don't go through all this only to slide back into old patterns when the pressure's off." Victoria looked at this young man who had somehow become both her accuser and her guide on this journey toward accountability. "I'll try not to disappoint you. Again." "It's not about disappointing me," Marcus replied. "It's about becoming someone who doesn't need to destroy others to feel powerful. I think that might actually make you happier in the long run." As Rebecca drove her home, Victoria pondered Marcus's words. The past month had been the most difficult of her life, a complete dismantling of her self-image and public persona. Yet beneath the shame and remorse, there was something else emerging, a sense of liberation from the constant need to assert dominance, to crush opposition, to win at all costs. Perhaps, she thought, there was wisdom in this teenager's assessment. Perhaps genuine connection, even through the painful process of accountability, offered something her previous life of isolated power never could. 6 months after the settlement, Victoria stood before a different kind of audience. The annual Westfield Educational Excellence Conference had once been her showcase, an opportunity to present herself as a passionate advocate for students while networking with other influential figures. Now she attended not as the keynote speaker, but as part of a panel titled Accountability and Reform in Educational Governance. Beside her sat Marcus Johnson, now a high school senior with college acceptance letters from several prestigious universities. Also on the panel were Dr. Bennett, a civil rights attorney specializing in education, and Richard Phillips, who had helped implement the oversight reforms Victoria had recommended to the board. The audience watched with undisguised curiosity as Victoria took her turn at the microphone. Many had followed the news of her downfall, but few had heard her speak publicly since the board meeting where she had confessed her abuses of power. 6 months ago, she began, I sat in a courtroom watching my carefully constructed life unravel as evidence of my systematic targeting of students was presented to a judge. Today, I'm here not to defend those actions, but to ensure they serve as a warning about the dangers of unchecked authority in educational settings. Victoria outlined the reforms that had been implemented at Westfield Academy and across the district. Independent review of all disciplinary actions, anonymous reporting systems for teachers and staff, regular audits of resource allocation with special attention to racial and economic equity. She explained how these changes made it more difficult for anyone, regardless of wealth or influence, to weaponize the educational system against vulnerable students. What I did was not unique, she acknowledged. It was simply an extreme example of how power can corrupt educational institutions when proper oversight is absent. The students I targeted were resilient enough to fight back, but many others never get that opportunity. When the moderator asked what she had learned from the experience, Victoria glanced at Marcus before answering. I've learned that true accountability isn't a single moment of reckoning, but an ongoing process. It's not enough to apologize or pay settlements. Real amends require changing the systems that enabled the harm in the first place and committing to a different way of using whatever influence you have. After the panel, Victoria found herself approached by educators and administrators from other districts, some seeking advice on implementing similar reforms, others wanting to understand how someone in her position could have gone so wrong. You've become something of a cautionary tale in educational circles, commented one superintendent from a neighboring district, though I must say you're handling it with more grace than most would. Victoria smiled ruefully. Grace had nothing to do with it. The students demanded better, and I finally started listening. Across the reception hall, she spotted Marcus speaking with representatives from several universities. His presence at the conference had attracted attention from educational institutions eager to demonstrate their commitment to equity and student advocacy. Rebecca Walsh appeared at Victoria's elbow, now acting more as friend than attorney. Your former colleagues are watching you like they expect you to spontaneously combust, she observed dryly. They're waiting for the mask to slip, Victoria replied, for the real me to re-emerge once the pressure's off. And will it? Victoria considered the question seriously. I don't think so. Not because I've magically become a saint, but because I've seen too clearly what that version of me was capable of. I can't unsee it. Later, as the conference wound down, Victoria found herself walking alongside Marcus toward the parking area. Impressive turnout for your panel, she remarked. I saw at least 3 college presidents taking notes during your speech. Marcus nodded. People are paying attention. The question is whether that attention will translate into meaningful change or just better PR. A healthy skepticism, Victoria acknowledged. Well earned in your case. They walked in comfortable silence for a moment before Marcus spoke again. I got the official scholarship letter from Columbia yesterday. Full ride, including summer research opportunities. Congratulations. That's wonderful news. My mom cried when I showed her. Happy tears this time. He paused. I wanted you to know that I'm planning to study educational policy and civil rights law. What happened to me, to all of us, showed me how vulnerable students are when systems fail them. Victoria felt a complex mixture of emotions, pride in his resilience, shame at having been the catalyst for his trauma, and a strange sense of rightness that something constructive might emerge from the wreckage she had caused. You'll be extraordinary at it, she said simply. What about you? Marcus asked. Besides becoming the poster child for educational accountability, what's next? It was the question Victoria had been considering for months. Her business interests continued. Westfield Properties was too established to collapse without her daily presence. But her priorities had shifted fundamentally. I've been working with a coalition of corporate leaders to establish ethical guidelines for community engagement, she explained. Teaching others how to recognize when business interests are trampling on basic human dignity. It's humbling work. Sounds useful, Marcus replied, as long as you're not just teaching them how to avoid getting caught. Victoria smiled at his characteristic directness. Fair point. That's why I've insisted on having community representatives and accountability partners involved in every aspect of the project. They reached the parking area where Rebecca waited with Victoria's car, and Tanisha Johnson stood beside her modest sedan. Marcus tells me you're speaking at his graduation next month, Tanisha said, her initial coldness toward Victoria having gradually evolved into a cautious, pragmatic acceptance. If that's still acceptable to you both, Victoria replied. I understand if you've reconsidered. No, it's important, Tanisha said firmly. The community needs to see that accountability doesn't end with a settlement check or a few public apologies. It's an ongoing commitment. As they prepared to part ways, Marcus extended his hand to Victoria, a simple gesture that nonetheless represented a significant evolution from their first tense meetings. "Keep doing the work," he said, his handshake firm, "even when no one's watching." "I will," Victoria promised, "and you keep holding people like me accountable." "Count on it," he replied with a smile that held both warmth and steel. On the drive home, Victoria reflected on how profoundly her life had changed since that day in court, when Marcus had confronted her with evidence of her calculated cruelty. The external trappings remained similar. She still lived in her elegant home, still commanded considerable wealth and influence, but her relationship to that privilege had transformed. "Penny for your thoughts," Rebecca said from the driver's seat. "I was thinking about identity," Victoria replied, "about how completely I had defined myself by power and control, and how disorienting it's been to let that definition go." "And what's replacing it?" Victoria considered the question. "I'm not entirely sure yet. Something more connected to other people. Something less afraid of vulnerability." "That sounds healthier," Rebecca observed. "It feels unfinished," Victoria admitted, "like I'm still becoming whatever comes next." "Maybe that's the point," Rebecca suggested. "Maybe being finished was part of the problem. Seeing yourself as a completed project instead of someone constantly learning and evolving." As they pulled into her driveway, Victoria noticed a package on her porch. Inside, she found a framed document, the official charter for the scholarship foundation she had established for the 15 students, now expanded to include additional recipients from underserved communities each year. Attached was a simple note in Marcus's handwriting. "Systems change people, but sometimes people change systems. Keep going." Victoria placed the frame on her desk, where it would serve as a daily reminder of both her capacity for harm and her potential for repair. The journey ahead remained uncertain. Genuine accountability offered no neat resolutions or easy absolution. But for the first time in her adult life, Victoria Hargrove found herself measured not by what she controlled, but by what she contributed. That evening, she sat down at her computer to write, not emails directing retaliation or manipulating outcomes, but a graduation speech for Marcus and his classmates. She began with words that would have been unimaginable to her former self. "The most valuable lesson I've learned came from a teenager who had every reason to pursue vengeance, but chose instead to demand justice, not just for himself, but for all those who might come after him. He taught me that true power isn't found in dominating others, but in creating systems where everyone can thrive." Outside her window, the sun set on Westfield, casting long shadows across a community still healing from the divisions she had helped create. The work of repair would continue long after the headlines faded and public interest moved elsewhere. It would require constant vigilance against the temptation to return to old patterns of behavior, constant courage to remain vulnerable in the face of justified skepticism. But as Victoria considered the young lives now moving forward with renewed opportunities, Marcus headed to Columbia, Zoe accepted to a specialized math program, Devon with a second chance at athletic scholarships, she found something she had never experienced at the height of her power and influence: a sense of genuine purpose that required neither victims nor vanquished opponents. It wasn't redemption. That word suggested a completed journey rather than an ongoing commitment. But it was perhaps the beginning of something authentic, something worthy of the second chance those 15 brave students had reluctantly offered when they had every right to walk away. And for now, that would have to be enough.